In this video, I will be showing you how to create this, a unique looking coffee table. Not only is its work surface made of burnt woods from a Euro pallet capsulated in epoxy resin, but its main body is also made up of a sliced up barrel which houses a bit of electronics in order to light up the coffee table with LEDs. Through this combination of materials, this coffee table is truly special and also offers a bit of storage space for all kinds of remotes. So let's not waste any more time and let me show you what steps are required to create your own. Let's get started. This video is sponsored by JLC PCB, who currently gives out PCB coupons to customers who follow the guidelines stated in the video description. So with or without PCB coupon, feel free to upload your Gerber files today and order your PCBs from JLC PCB for cheap. We started off with the Euro pallets, from which we salvaged the woods for the project by utilizing a crowbar, pliers and a lot of force. And what we have learned from this experience is that such wood salvaging is only worth it if you get a Euro pallet for free. Otherwise, we would recommend buying woods to save quite a bit of time. But anyway, next we marked a 59 cm length onto 7 pieces of the woods, cut them with a jigsaw and afterwards got rid of the rough surfaces and edges by using an orbital sander. To give the woods a more interesting look though, we also burned it a bit with a propane torch. And as soon as that was done, we brought in the 5 pre-cut pieces of textured coated board, with those measurements, which will form the casting molds for our work surface. So we pre-drilled a few dozens of holes through the side pieces into the bottom piece and combined them mechanically with wood screws after we sealed all the edges and corners with silicone. Once the mold was complete and all silicone lines were smoothed out, it was time to bring in a canister of charl oil, which is a special type of oil that prevents the epoxy resin from sticking to the woods. As soon as the lubrication was complete, we positioned the 7 wood pieces inside the mold, one after the other, and then secured them in place from the bottom with wood screws. Here are, by the way, the measurements for our work surface, in case you're interested. But anyway, at this point I grabbed the 2-component epoxy resin, of which I created a 3-liter batch inside a plastic bucket, according to the mix ratio given by the manufacturer. We then slowly poured this resin inside the molds, and after popping all the rising air bubbles with a heat gun, we let it dry for 48 hours. During that time, we started working on our old barrel, which came with pretty standard dimensions. First off, we determined and marked a middle line on the top and bottom piece through the help of a thread, and then connected those lines on the main body of the barrel. By following those lines with an angle grinder, it was actually not that difficult to cut the barrel in 2 halves in less than 10 minutes. And after cleaning the inside of the barrel and getting rid of all the sharp edges, we chose a suitable spot for an opening, marked it and removed the barrel sheet with the angle grinder as well. After doing a bit more rasp treatment, we then positioned 2 hinges onto the door, drilled their mounting holes and locked them in position with rivets. As soon as that was done, I grabbed the small wood handle I got from the home improvement store, burned it, which I may have overdone a bit, created holes for it in the door and secured it to it with the given screws. Then we marked the holes for the door onto the barrel, drilled them and secured it in place with more rivets. The only thing our door was lacking was a limiter, which we added under one handle screw head, and thus we finally got more storage space for the coffee table. At this point we brought in square steel, M14 nuts and an M14 threaded rods, out of which we ultimately created the legs for the coffee table. To start off, we desperately tried determining a suitable angle for the legs, and finally settled on around 56 degrees after a bit of experimenting. That means we could mark a fitting length on one of them at that angle, and thus mark this 20.5 cm length onto the 3 other square steel pieces, in order to reach an overall height of 43 cm for the coffee table. After then cutting these square steels with the angle grinder, we continued to use it to remove a bit of material at the left and right side of 4 M14 nuts, so that they fit perfectly inside the hollow square steel. This was important because otherwise we would not have been able to weld the nuts inside them. And as soon as one nut was welded to one square steel more or less successfully, we made everything a bit more pretty with the angle grinder treatment and continued by marking the 4 mounting holes for the legs 12 cm apart from the top and bottom piece. After then drilling 14 mm holes for them, we cut smaller pieces of the threaded rods, screwed them inside the legs and finally secured them to the barrel with 2 more washers and another M14 nuts on the insides. Now our coffee table was finally able to stand on its own, which means it was time for the electronics. Since we didn't want to have a wire permanently connected to it, we decided on a 12V battery solution. It connects to a generic 12V RGBW LED strip controller and thus an RGBW LED strip through a simple power switch. To charge it, I used a generic 12V battery charger, whose mains input I wired up to an IEC connector mounted in the barrel sheets, and whose charge status LED gets positioned right next to the connector. To implement this plan, I firstly got this intelligent charger that supports 12V batteries and can output up to 1 amp of current. After unboxing it, removing its enclosure and having a closer look at its main circuit, I connected its output to another 12V battery and hooked up its input to mains voltage. And sure enough, the red LED lit up and the battery started charging with around 1 amp. So I removed the status LED from the PCB in order to reconnect it with a bit of extension wire to later position it inside the barrel sheet. And after doing a quick test, I positioned the naked charger circuit inside a distribution box, pushed all of the 3 wires to the outside and closed it up. Now back to the barrel, where we firstly marked a location for the IEC connector, the 12V power switch and the status LED. After completing the cutout for the connector, we secured it in place with rivets, drilled the remaining 2 holes, and then I continued by soldering a PE wire to the IEC connector, which I hooked up to the barrel's metal body with the power switch for safety reasons. Next, I added the mains input wires of the charger to the connector, as well as wires for the power switch, and glued the status LED in place. Last but not least for the wiring, I crimped cable shoes to the battery wires and connected all wires to one another with Vago terminals, according to the scheme I showed you a minute ago. After then hooking up the battery as well as the RGBW LED strip controller, everything seemed to work correctly, which means it was time for me to secure the LED strip all around the barrel. And with that step being completed, the electronic system was done. And thus next we checked on our work surface, which partly turned out great, but on other sections created lots of bubbles and white foam due to the reaction with the woods. To still create a good looking surface finish, we firstly removed all the screws from the side pieces and then hammered them off the epoxy resin. At this point we used a router to round off the edges of the top sides and then continued by hitting the surface with the orbital sander and P80 grit sandpaper. This sanding helped a lot to get a smoother surface, but we decided to do this properly by incrementally increasing the sandpaper grids up to P2000. That means the rough sandpaper grids were all done with a machine, while we had to use a lot of force, water and patience for the finer sandpaper grids. And after 3 hours of sanding, the work surface looked pretty good. So we removed the last piece of the molds with wood wedges and a hammer, and continued by marking the outline of the barrel onto the bottom side of the work surface. The last step was to mill this outline 5 mm deep, and finally positioning the work surface on top of the barrel to complete this unique coffee table. I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe it inspired you to create something similar on your own. If so, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Stay creative, and I will see you next time!